All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today we're taking a close look at the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, back in March 2023.
Yeah.
Wild story, really. And we've got a lot to unpack here. A case study from the University of Hong Kong, SVB's financial statements,
hmm
news coverage. We even got statements from the Fed.
Yeah, well, a lot of material.
And what's really fascinating is just weeks before everything went down, SVB was considered like a top-tier bank.
One of the best.
So how did it all go so wrong? Let's find out.
This was not your typical bank failure.
Right.
The ripple effects from SVB's collapse,
Yeah.
they really spread throughout the entire financial system.
Oh, yeah.
It exposed some real vulnerabilities, things that a lot of people just weren't even aware of.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So to get us started, I guess, what exactly was SVB? What made it so different in the banking world?
Yeah, so SVB was deeply connected to the tech startup scene.
Okay.
They were like the bank for venture capitalists
Mm-hmm.
and the innovative companies that they were backing.
You could almost call them the financial backbone of Silicon Valley.
Okay, so not your typical like conservative bank that just lends to established businesses.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Their whole model was really about supporting innovation,
Mm-hmm.
even if that meant taking on more risk.
Yeah.
And for a while, it was a winning strategy, right? The bank grew super fast,
Right.
made some big acquisitions like buying Boston Private
Yeah.
for $1 billion back in 2021.
Wow. Okay, so rapid growth, close ties to tech, comfortable with risk. This is starting to sound like a recipe for a success story,
Yeah,
not a financial meltdown,
right.
So where did things start to, I don't know, go off the rails?
Well, you can't talk about SVB's collapse without talking about the bank run.
Right.
It was classic panic,
Mm-hmm.
depositors rushing to pull their money out.
Yeah.
We're talking a staggering $42 billion withdrawn in just one day. Hold on, $42 billion in one day. That's more than some countries' GDPs. What could have possibly triggered that level of panic? Like, were there any specific rumors or?
It all started when SVB tried to raise capital.
Okay.
They had, taken some losses on their investments.
Yeah.
They needed an infusion of cash
Right.
to sort of strengthen their position.
Yeah.
But when that attempt failed, it really spooked investors and depositors.
Mm-hmm.
Things just spiraled from there.
Yeah. So I don't know, a loss of confidence that just kind of snowballed.
Exactly.
One crack in the facade and everybody heads for the exits.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. Those losses that sort of triggered this panic
Yeah.
were mainly tied to something called hold-to-maturity securities.
Hold to maturity securities. Those
Yeah.
are basically like long-term bonds, right?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
SVB had invested heavily in these bonds, figuring they would just hold on to them until maturity and
Yeah.
collect the full return.
Mm.
But then interest rates start shooting up in 2022.
Yeah.
And the value of those bonds, well, it began to tank.
Right. Yeah. Bond values and interest rates, they have that inverse relationship.
Right.
But this is something banks deal with all the time, isn't it?
Yeah.
So why was it such a huge problem for SVB?
Well, here's the thing.
Yeah.
The losses SVB was taking on these hold-to-maturity securities, they weren't immediately obvious in their main financial statements.
Oh.
They're tucked away in the footnotes.
The footnotes?
And let's be honest, most people, even investors,
Yeah.
don't spend their weekends poring over those.
No, not exactly light reading, right?
No.
Okay, so the public's perception of SVB's financial health, it wasn't completely accurate.
Right. And this kind of leads us to an accounting controversy, right?
Okay.
There are different ways to account for securities depending on whether a bank plans to hold them to maturity or sell them before they mature.
Right. You have those available for sale securities and then the hold to maturity ones. And, I do remember there were these debates about how transparent banks should be about unrealized losses, especially on those hold to maturity investments.
Exactly.
What was the thinking there?
So advocates for what's called fair value accounting, they argued that these unrealized losses, even on hold-to-maturity securities, should be reflected in the bank's reported income. They said it would give a much clearer picture of the bank's true financial health.
Very simple.
But, the banking industry, they push back.
Yeah, of course.
They argued that it would create unnecessary volatility
Right.
and distort the perception of a bank's long-term stability.
Yeah, so it's like this trade-off between,
at-
I guess, transparency versus stability. I can see why that'd be a tough call.
Yeah.
But in SVB's case, I mean, that lack of transparency about how much they were actually losing, it definitely contributed to the panic, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't just about the accounting either. The FDIC launched an investigation
Oh, wow.
into SVB's management because there were concerns about potential negligence
Yeah.
and mismanagement of risk.
Okay. And didn't some executives sell off a bunch of their stock right before everything imploded? I mean, that's got to raise some red flags, right?
Yes, several top executives, including the CEO and CFO, sold a significant amount of stock just weeks before the collapse.
Wow.
Definitely fueled suspicions that they might have known more than they were letting on.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, we've got risky investments, accounting practices that maybe weren't as transparent as they could have been, and some potential issues with management. Right. So, what about the regulators? Were they aware of all of this? I mean, weren't there systems in place to prevent something like this from happening?
That's the key question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, banks have to comply with a whole bunch of regulations.
Yeah.
Including things like capital adequacy ratios, stress tests, liquidity tests.
Right.
And get this, SVB actually passed these tests, even with their risky investments.
Wait, hold on. So they passed the tests that are supposed to assess their financial health.
Yeah.
But then they went belly up just a few months later. How is that even possible? Did the tests miss something crucial?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And I think it points to a potential blind spot in the system.
Okay.
It seems like the regulations, at least as they were at the time, they didn't fully account for the specific risks posed by the rapid rise in interest rates.
Right.
And also the fact that SVB's deposits were very concentrated in one vulnerable sector,
Right.
Tech startups and venture capitalists.
So the regulations were basically built for a different financial environment.
Exactly.
That one where interest rates weren't skyrocketing and where a bank's depositors weren't all in the same boat, so to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's even more alarming is the wider impact of all of this. SVB, they weren't the only bank holding these long-term bonds that were losing value.
Right.
Across the U.S. banking system, unrealized losses due to rising interest rates, well, they totaled a staggering $620 billion.
$620 billion. That's just, wow. Are you saying other banks were also on the verge of collapse?
I mean, most other banks weren't in as precarious a position as SVB.
Right.
But the sheer size of these unrealized losses,
Yeah.
it revealed a systemic vulnerability.
Okay.
It suddenly became clear that the entire banking sector was, well, much more fragile than anyone had realized.
Okay, so if those usual regulatory tools like stress tests weren't catching these vulnerabilities, was there anything else that could have served as a warning sign? Like, was there anything that could have tipped people off that things were about to go south?
Well, there's this concept called credit default swaps,
Okay.
or CDS, that some experts believe could have acted as a kind of early warning system.
Credit default swaps. Okay, I think I've heard of those, but I'm not totally clear on what they are. Could you break that down for us?
Sure. Imagine you're worried that your house might burn down. So you buy insurance, right, to protect yourself financially if that happens.
Yeah.
CDS is kind of like insurance for banks.
Okay.
But instead of fire, they're insuring against the risk that a borrower might default on their loan.
Okay, so it's like a way for banks to hedge their bets, to kind of transfer some of that risk to someone else.
Exactly. And here's the interesting part. The price of these CDS contracts,
Okay.
what's called the CDS spread, can actually give you an indication of how risky the market considers a particular bank to be.
Oh, interesting. So if the CDS spread for a bank starts going up, it basically means that people are getting nervous about that bank's ability to repay its debts.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the canary in a coal mine.
Right.
When the canary stops singing, there's trouble brewing.
Yep.
If investors and regulators had been paying closer attention to CDS spreads for banks like SVB, they might have seen the warning signs a little sooner.
That's fascinating. It's like a whole other layer of information that could help us understand the health of the financial system.
Exactly.
But I kind of want to shift gears a little bit. We've talked about the risky investments, the accounting, the regulators.
Yeah.
What about like SVB's management team? What role did they play in all of this?
Well, that University of Hong Kong case study we mentioned, it really digs into SVB's leadership, and it's pretty revealing.
Okay.
Remember, this was a bank that really prided itself on being different, on embracing that fast-paced, innovative culture of Silicon Valley.
Right, yeah. They seem to really buy into that move fast and break things mentality.
Exactly.
That you see so much in the tech world.
Yeah.
But I mean, does that kind of approach really work when you're dealing with people's money?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it seems like that culture of innovation, that willingness to take risks, it might have extended to their management style as well.
Okay.
After the COVID-19 pandemic hit, SVB's management team decided to stick with an entirely remote work setup.
Interesting.
Executives were scattered across different time zones.
That's pretty unusual for a bank, isn't it?
Yeah.
I always kind of imagined like those high-powered finance types working long hours in fancy offices, constantly on the phone making deals.
Yeah, you're right. Most financial institutions, especially the big ones, they're all about that face-to-face interaction.
Right.
But SVB was doing things differently.
Yeah.
And according to some former SVB executives who were interviewed for the Financial Times, this remote work situation, it may have created some challenges.
Right.
Especially, as a bank was growing so rapidly and expanding into new areas.
Right.
There were concerns that communication just wasn't as effective as it could have been.
I see.
That potential risks weren't being identified and addressed quickly enough.
So it's possible that their decentralized management structure, while intended to be agile and innovative, it might have actually backfired.
It's certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
And there were other red flags too.
Okay.
The case study mentions that SVB seemed to be prioritizing social issues over some core risk management practices.
Interesting.
There's even a story about how they were relying heavily on consultants to develop new strategies instead of focusing on mitigating the risks associated with those rising interest rates we talked about earlier.
Yeah. So maybe they weren't as focused as they should have been on the potential threats that were kind of looming on the horizon.
It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
But it definitely raises some questions about their priorities.
Right. And then there's the whole issue of those executive stock sales.
Yeah.
Remember the CEO, the CFO, and a top executive sold like millions of dollars worth of SVB stock.
Yeah.
It was weeks before the bank went under. I mean, that timing was definitely suspicious.
Yeah, it was enough to trigger an FDIC investigation into potential insider trading.
Wow.
Now, it's important to note that selling stock isn't necessarily illegal or unethical.
Yeah.
Executives do it all the time for various reasons.
Of course, yeah.
But the timing of these sales, so close to the bank's failure, it definitely raised some eyebrows.
Sure.
It made people wonder, if some members of SVB's leadership knew about the severity of the bank's problems, and decided to cash out, before things hit the fan.
Right. So it seems like there was a whole like confluence of factors at play here.
Yeah.
Risky investments.
Right.
Questions about their accounting practices, potential management missteps, and a regulatory system that maybe wasn't fully equipped to deal with the unique challenges that SVB presented.
It really does sound like a perfect storm.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. But even with all of these factors like in play, things still unfolded incredibly quickly, Yeah. So what was the final trigger that sent SVB into a tailspin? What was the tipping point?
I mean, we know the bank run was the ultimate cause of death.
Right.
But what sparked that initial wave of panic? Was it just the failed attempt to raise capital?
Yeah.
Or was there something else going on?
Yeah, because that failed capital raise was definitely a major factor.
But the case study points to another element that I think is often overlooked.
Okay.
The power of social media.
Ah, yes.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. How did social media play a role in the collapse of a bank?
Well, think about SVB's customer base.
Yeah.
It was heavily concentrated in the tech sector.
Right.
And people in tech, they tend to be pretty active on social media.
Yeah, they're pretty online.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So when news of SVB's failed capital raise started to spread,
Yeah.
it didn't just circulate through the usual financial channels. It exploded on Twitter, LinkedIn,
Right.
all these other platforms.
So instead of being like just a concern for Wall Street analysts and investors,
Right.
SVB's financial troubles became a topic of conversation for the very people who had like a lot of money deposited in the bank.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where the speed of information flow really comes into play.
Yeah.
In the past, a bank might have had more time to address a financial crisis before widespread panic set in.
Right.
But with social media, amplifying concerns in real time,
Right.
SVB was suddenly facing a wave of panicked depositors
Yeah.
who were pulling their money out as fast as they could.
It's like a digital bank run.
Yeah,
Instead of lining up outside a physical bank,
Yeah.
people were storming the virtual exits.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it really highlights an important point.
Sure.
In today's hyper-connected world, the traditional tools and safeguards
Yeah.
that we've relied on to maintain financial stability, well, they might not be enough anymore.
Right.
The speed at which information spreads, the interconnectedness of the financial system,
Yeah.
the rise of social media, these are all factors that can amplify risks and accelerate a crisis.
So in a sense, SVB's collapse wasn't just, a failure of a single bank
Right.
or even a failure of regulation.
Yeah.
It was a failure to adapt to a new financial reality.
One where the rules of the game have fundamentally changed.
Yeah.
We've got these incredibly complex financial systems, information flying around at lightning speed, and this whole new level of interconnectedness that we're only beginning to understand.
Right.
It kind of makes you wonder, how can we even begin to ensure transparency, accountability, and resilience in this new landscape?
That's a really profound point.
Yeah.
And it really gets to the heart of the challenges we're facing, right?
Yeah.
How do we adapt our regulatory frameworks, our risk management practices,
Right.
even our accounting standards,
Right.
to keep pace with this rapidly evolving financial world?
Those are big questions.
Yeah.
But before we, get too lost in the existential crisis of modern finance, I'm curious about the practical aftermath of SVB's collapse. What happened to all the depositors?
Yeah.
Especially those startups and venture capitalists.
Who had so much of their money tied up with SVB? Did
Right.
they lose everything?
That's a great question. And it actually leads us to what happened after the collapse.
Okay.
So after SVB collapsed, U.S. regulators took a pretty dramatic step.
Okay.
They guaranteed that all SVB depositors would get their money back.
Really? All of them?
Yeah, even those who had, more than the FDIC's usual insured limit.
Right, which is $250,000.
Exactly, $250,000. So this was a pretty significant intervention.
Yeah, what was the thinking behind that? I mean, why go to such lengths?
Well, they were trying to prevent a full-blown panic.
Okay.
Regulators recognized that if SVB failed and they didn't protect the depositors,
Yeah.
it could have been catastrophic, not just for the tech sector,
Right.
but potentially for the entire economy.
Yeah, that makes
It could have triggered a domino effect
Right. Yeah.
of bank failures.
They had to step in, they had to do something.
Exactly. They had to act fast to stabilize the system.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about SVB itself? Did they just disappear overnight?
Well, not exactly. The FDIC took control of SVB,
Okay.
and they created something called Silicon Valley Bridge Bank
Okay.
to handle its ongoing operations.
Okay.
And they brought in Tim Mayopoulos, who's a veteran banking executive,
Okay.
to run the Bridge Bank and try to find a buyer.
So they basically kept the lights on
Right.
while they figured out what to do with all the pieces.
Exactly. And it actually didn't take very long for them to find a buyer.
Oh, okay.
HSBC, which is a huge global bank,
Right, yeah.
they bought SVB's UK arm,
Okay.
and then First Citizens Bank Shares, which is a regional bank in North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
they agreed to buy a big chunk of SVB's remaining assets.
So SVB essentially got, I don't know, carved up
Yeah.
and absorbed by other banks. Makes sense. But what about accountability? You know, did anyone face any consequences for this whole meltdown?
Well, the FDIC did launch an investigation into SVB's management. You know, they were looking into those executive stock sales we talked about.
Right, right.
As well as, broader questions about their risk management practices.
Yeah.
And potential negligence.
Okay.
But as of today, no criminal charges have been filed.
So while the depositors got bailed out, it seems like the people at the top might escape any serious repercussions.
That's a possibility, and it's something that a lot of people have criticized.
Right.
They argue that this lack of accountability, it sends the wrong message, right?
Yeah.
It might even encourage reckless behavior in the future.
It's a valid point, right? I mean, if there are no real consequences for bad decisions that lead to a financial meltdown,
right?
What's to stop it from happening again?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
With no easy answers. But one thing is for sure, SVB's collapse was a major wake-up call for the entire banking sector.
Oh, yeah.
It forced everyone,
Yeah.
Regulators, investors, bank executives, to confront some uncomfortable truths about the system's vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and it really highlighted the need to rethink our whole approach, right?
Exactly.
To regulation, risk management, even our accounting standards. I mean, we need systems that can actually keep up with this rapidly changing financial landscape.
Exactly. And this brings us full circle back to that question from the University of Hong Kong case study.
Right.
In a world where financial systems are increasingly complex and information spreads at lightning speed.
Yeah.
How can we ensure transparency,
right,
accountability, and resilience in the banking sector?
It's a question that all of us need to grapple with, right?
Yeah.
I mean, SVB's collapse was a stark reminder that the stability of our financial system, it's not something we can just take for granted. It demands constant vigilance, careful analysis, and a willingness to adapt to new challenges.
And it means holding those in positions of power accountable for their decisions,
Absolutely.
Both in the financial world and in the regulatory bodies that oversee it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
We've covered a lot of ground, from those hold-to-maturity securities to the impact of social media on the financial system.
Yeah, it's amazing how all these things are connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've explored that complex web of factors, right?
Yeah.
That led to SVB's collapse, from risky investments and questionable accounting to potential management failures and regulatory gaps.
And we've touched on, the wider implications of this event for the future of banking.
Right, yeah. It's clear that we need to reassess our approach, to risk management, regulation, and transparency.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we encourage you, the listener, to keep exploring this topic.
Yeah. Read those footnotes.
Yeah.
Question assumptions.
Absolutely.
And consider the broader context of financial events.
A well-informed public is the best defense against future crises.
Couldn't agree more.
Stay curious and keep asking those tough questions. Until next time.